Welcome to Kaleidoscope. Let's talk. With me today is literary and legal superstar Philippe Sands, an international lawyer, professor and author renowned for his expertise in international law, particularly in human rights and genocide. His works, including East-West Street and The Rat Line, have gained international recognition for their profound exploration of legal and historical narratives. Philippe's upcoming 38 Londres Street delves into the chilling connections between Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet and senior SS officer Walter Rauff, and I caught up with him at the Gaul Literary Festival this year. How are you seeing the world currently in the context of human rights and genocide?
Not well. Plainly, there are many challenges. We have conflicts in Sudan, in Ukraine and Russia, in Palestine and Israel, and we now have a new president in the United States who seems hell-bent on ripping up the world's rule-based system with human rights at the epicenter of his target, along with all the rules on climate change. So, difficult times ahead.
When it comes to human rights, do you think there is a right and a wrong in times of war?
So the issue with human rights is it has to be put in the context of societal actions and inactions generally. As you know from my book East-West Street, I focused on this remarkable moment in 1945 when for the first time states came together and said that the power of the state is not unlimited and that international law protects the rights of individuals, crimes against humanity, and groups, the crime of genocide. And they made clear that war does not allow you to deviate from the fundamental precepts of humanity, namely to distinguish between civilian targets and military targets. And what we're seeing right now in Ukraine, the city of Lviv, a beloved place for me where East-West Street is largely set, having attacks on civilian objectives that have nothing to do with military objectives, 1,000 miles from the front line being targeted by Russia. We see the attacks of the 7th of October in Israel, children, the elderly, women being executed. We see, in consequence to that, the terrible crimes perpetrated against civilians, children, women, the elderly in Gaza, huge numbers of deaths, totally disproportionate to the military objectives. What do we do in those circumstances? We resist, we point out the wrongs that are happening, the crimes that we believe to be occurring, and the story of human rights is that it is a long game, and we just bat on.
You mentioned Gaza, you mentioned Israel. How do you see Gaza and Israel right now?
In a very difficult situation. As you may know, I was counsel for the Palestinian Authority in an important case at the International Court of Justice on the right of self-determination of the Palestinians, essentially saying there is a right to Palestinian statehood, something I passionately believe in today, not in a few years, not the subject of a negotiation, now. And I find myself in a delicate and difficult position. I have family in Israel, I have Palestinian friends. My guiding star has always been to feel empathy for anyone who is on the wrong side of abuse and horror, irrespective of identity, nationality, ethnicity, orientation, and so on and so forth. And I just stick to the fundamental principles, the rule of law, the settlement of 1945, and again, we just bat on. But it's plain, particularly in recent days, with some of the statements, terrible statements, by President Trump about essentially removing an entire population, 2 million people, from the territory of Gaza and sending them where? I dealt with this in my book, The Last Colony, on the Chagos Archipelago, not so far from where we are, Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. You can't remove people from their homes, period. There's no ifs and buts. It's wrong, it's prohibited, it's a crime, it cannot happen, the world has to resist.
What do you see of Sri Lanka and how human rights has panned out in times of war and peace?
My relationship with Sri Lanka actually goes back a long way, even though this is my first visit to the country. When I was a very young international lawyer in the late 80s and the early 90s, I met a man called Christopher Willimantry, who was a judge at the International Court of Justice, and he became one of my mentors. He was really the father of modern international environmental law. It was he, in 1996, who drafted the famous advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, which said for the first time in history, protection of the environment is part of international law. Right now, in these days, the conversations that have been most interesting for me are off the back of a new book I have coming out in April, which is called 38 Londres Street on Impunity, Pinochet and Patagonia. And the beating heart of that book is 1,400 people who were disappeared between 1973 and 1977. And talking with a number of people here involved on all sides of the story, I've come to understand the place of the disappeared in Sri Lankan society. And one of the things that I've picked up from now 40 years of involvement in the world of international crimes and wars and conflicts is say nothing is not an option. These things can't be buried under the carpet. You have to find a way to address what has happened in the past. It could be court proceedings, it could be transitional justice, it could be literature, but you can't simply pass in silence on what has happened. This is the beating heart of my book, East-West Street. I open it with a line from a couple of Hungarian psychoanalysts who say, what we are haunted by is the secrets of others. Silence comes back to bite us on our legs and elsewhere. At some point, Sri Lanka must, like any society, find a way to address what has happened. It is for Sri Lanka to decide how that happens, and there are many different ways of making it happen. In Northern Ireland, for example, where the number of disappeared is much fewer, it's a huge issue 40 years on. Say nothing is not an option. It has to be addressed in some form.
Will this world ever be free of war, or do you have a different opinion?
No, this world will never be free of war. It seems to be inherent of the nature of humans, or maybe I should put it a different way, the nature of men, because my own experience, for example, sitting as an international arbitrator on cases, when I started 20 years ago, I only ever sat with men, and there was a particular, I wouldn't say aggression, but men want to win, men want to succeed, men want to be on top. This is a generality. Then, maybe 10 years ago, I sat for the first time with a woman, and now I sit often where I'm the only male on a panel, and it's very different. It's collegial. It's about finding solutions that everyone can live with, not winning your particular argument. And in my world of international crimes, for example on genocide, only one female has ever been convicted of the crime of genocide. Every other one is a male. So let me put it a different way. My sense is, so long as males dominate, we're going to have problems.
How do you see the world and the future of war in this world?
War is changing, as you will know as well as I do. It's becoming more technological. We've got the arrival, for example, of killing by drones, and even more significant, drones that are in effect not directly operated by humans, but operated by algorithms, which are placed in the operating mechanism of the drone, which means that the drone now sometimes is not controlled directly at a particular instance, but takes decisions of its own, quote unquote. And this worries me greatly. I worry about what we are unleashing upon ourselves with our technologies without having fully thought through the consequences of what we are doing or how we are able to control those things. So I'm anxious about this.
How important is it for people to revisit historical narratives, analyze them, and learn from them and move on?
It's a very delicate issue, how you revisit the past. I'm doing it now with this new book on Pinochet in London. It's very difficult in Chile, depending on who you're with, to talk about that period between 73 and 90, rather like Sri Lanka, I suspect, in which a lot of people would prefer not to revisit what happened. But in the course of revisiting what's happened, and I've met people in writing my book on many sides of the story, perpetrators and victims, and tried to understand why these things happened. I'm a passionate believer in going back, but as I said right at the beginning, I've got a growing question in my mind. Is it best to go back through the courtroom or through the pages of a book, a novel, or non-fiction? I'm beginning to ask myself the question, could it be that a judgment of an international court or domestic court is less important, less significant in going back to the past than a finely honed novel or a work of non-fiction? These are questions I'm asking myself and that I think are worth addressing. It comes back to the simple point. Yes, in answer to your question, we must go back to the past, but how we go back to the past is, I think, a matter that reasonable people can disagree on.
You've got me thinking too. Thank you so much, Philip.
Wonderful to be
Lovely
with you.
having you
Thank you
here.
for your wonderful questions.
Did you know Kaleidoscope is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn? Remember to subscribe, follow, and like us for more.